This is Views and News with Clarence Ford.
Only on Cape Talk.
Welcome back. It is nearly 9:33. Views and News through till 12 o'clock on May Day. And, of course, our next segment with the Naked Scientist, consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge, Dr. Chris Smith, our Naked Scientist, joining us via Zoom from the UK. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you this morning.
Morning, Clarence. Happy May Day.
Day.
Yeah, happy May Day. Yeah, 1st of May. Amazing. How did we get here? So time is racing by.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's nearly middle of the year. Let's talk about what people want to talk about. It's questions that they have. And a reminder, you can post your question via WhatsApp on 072 567 1567, or you can call on 021 446 0567, and you'll jump the queue. You'll speak directly to the Naked Scientist. Somebody wants to know, if the human brain were a hard drive, what would its storage capacity be in terabytes, and why can't we delete memories we don't want? I would like that function.
Well, we do actually forget lots of stuff. We don't know exactly what the memory capacity of a human brain is, but it would be measured in probably terabytes. It's absolutely huge. There's about 100 billion nerve cells in the average human brain, and each of those makes about 5,000 connections to other nerve cells, and the connections store the information that we recall. But here's the thing, it doesn't store a pristine copy of information like your hard drive. When you put information down onto a memory stick or the hard disk of your computer, it is storing a specific piece of data which is going to come back as the same bit of data every time you retrieve it until the file becomes corrupted because something goes wrong. The human brain does not work like that. The human brain stores things in a compressed format. What do we mean by that? Well, in the same way that if you record this radio program or you took a photograph, you could record every single bit of data that goes into the program, every single pixel on the picture of your camera on the charge-coupled device behind the lens. Or what you could do is you could say, well, the human brain doesn't notice if we remove some of the information from the sound signatures of the sound waves. The human brain through the eye won't notice if we blur some of these colours together. So instead of storing 5 individual spots of colour, we'll make one bigger spot of an average colour and store that. This is called compression. And it's why when you take a picture and then you compress it into, say, a JPEG format, you can have the same looking picture, but it takes up a lot less space because the computer program has guessed where can we throw away data in order for you not to notice. And this is how our brains tend to work. We tend to throw things away and keep only certain things or connections to things. And we also rebuild things. So we use vague memories to rebuild the picture, fill in the gaps, as it were, using our intuition, instinct, and past experiences. So we don't actually have to store the hard data. Another good example, faces. How do we store faces? The average human can recognise thousands of different people and individuals that they've met over their lifetime. Do they store a picture of the face of every single one of them? No, absolutely not. What we think happens is that what a person stores is the differences between a face they're seeing for the first time and the average of all the faces they've ever seen. So you subtract one from the other and you're storing a few key differences which singles out that's a Clarence Ford, that's a Chris Smith, rather than every single pixel of a person's face. So in other words, we are storing small amounts of information that correspond to big amounts of data. And we don't know that we're doing that. We have no idea because our brain is not telling us that it's doing that. So we think we've got these perfect memories of everything, and we haven't. So it's not realistic to compare the memory capacity of a human brain with a computer hard drive because they're actually working in a very different way. But certainly the brain is an extraordinary computer, and it works incredibly efficiently and incredibly well to the extent that scientists are actually trying to copy how the brain works to make living computers. And I spoke recently to researchers in Australia who are actually growing nerve cells on computer chips or on glass chips and making networks of nerve cells and training them. They can actually have conversations with these nerve cells to make them do things. And they've trained one of them to play quite a complicated computer game, one back from about the late 90s called Doom. The computer, as in the cluster of nerve cells they've got on this dish, in this dish, will play Doom in front of them, and they can train it to do that. So people are very interested in how the brain works, but it is not without its weaknesses.
For sure. Sean wanting to know, why does dry earth smell so specific right after rains, and why are humans so sensitive to that specific scent?
Hello, Sean. What you're referring to is the extraordinary smell of fresh rain, and the word we give it is petrochore. And it is because in dry soil there are lots of fungi and fungal spores, actinomycetes and things. And when the rain comes down, it creates plumes of these spores because the raindrops hitting dry earth are a bit like you dropping a meteor onto the moon. It makes a big splatter pattern and it throws up into the air the spores. And those spores have a very distinctive smell. And when they go in our noses, we recognise them. And that's that smell of fresh rain, petrochore, and it's particles of dust and spores, largely fungal spores, which are in the ground, sitting there dormant until it rains.
Good morning. My question for the Naked Scientist is with regards to cataracts on eyes. They called it sailor's disease because of the exposure to the sun's UV light. I believe many health issues are the body's self-defense mechanisms in action, and that if you correct the terrain, then the issues will leave. Does the cataract operations remove your body's means to protect your eyes just to mask the symptoms? That's from Anthony in Klippheuvel.
Hello, Anthony. You're right in the sense that anybody who's doing a job or pursuing hobbies that lead to very high exposure to ultraviolet are at higher risk of cataracts. Sailing is one, skiing is another, just being out in the outdoors in bright places is another. The reason we get cataracts is because the lens, which sits in the front of your eye and does about 10 to 20% of the focusing of the light, yes, you did hear that correctly, although it's a lens, it just tweaks what your eye sees. Most of the heavy lifting of focusing is done by the front part of the eye, the cornea. The lens is made or contains proteins called crystallins. The clue's in the name. They're highly crystalline proteins. And the thing about the lens is that you don't replace it during your lifetime. What you're born with has to last a lifetime. So these very highly organised crystalline proteins, with time, do get degraded or damaged. And high energy light waves, like ultraviolet, can damage them. And when it damages them, they, instead of being nicely organised in very perfect rows that let light go through in straight lines, they get kinky and distorted or buckled. And this has the effect of scattering some of the light that comes through the lens. And that's why it looks foggy, because when you scatter light, you get a fog effect. That's why fog is hard to see through. And as this gets worse and worse and worse, the amount of light that makes it through the lens to the back of the eye, to the retina, where you decode the light waves and turn them into brain waves, that becomes so diminished that it cuts down your acuity significantly and people struggle to see, especially in lower light. So when there's plenty of light around, you can still get enough light coming through that you can make things out clearly. When we do a cataract operation, what the ophthalmologist will do is to go in behind the front part of the eye, and the lens sits in a bag, the lens capsule. And they make an incision in that bag and put a probe in. And these days we tend to use ultrasound to do it. It's called phacoemulsification. And you have a ultrasound probe that will use sound waves to obliterate the lens material in situ, and then you can suck the debris up into the probe as you're doing it. It's an amazing technique. I've actually helped out in some of these operations when I was a medical student, and very, very delicate. You think you're operating inside the front of someone's eye. It's just extraordinary, the skill of doing this. And you degrade all of the diseased cataract, and then they put in a new implant, which is a fake lens, which has similar strength to the one you had before, or maybe it has a few different characteristics to compensate for previous poor vision, and it sits inside the bag that your original natural lens sat in, and sits there quite happily and completely turns around a person's vision. It's one of the most successful, one of the most effective, and actually one of the oldest surgical interventions in existence. Even the Romans, we think, were sometimes doing cataract operations. Archaeologists have found instruments that look like that in a Roman's hands could have been used to remove diseased lenses in people with cataracts. But removing that lens restores vision. It won't do you harm in the long term because you're much more likely to succumb to bad quality of life, poor well-being, and trip over in the dark because you can't see, compared to putting in leaving a person with a foggy lens.
Question from Janine. Do statins cause dementia?
Hello, Janine. The answer is that they've looked very hard at this because people were concerned with these drugs because the nervous system uses a lot of cholesterol. The way that nerve cells stabilise their membranes, because the nerve cells in our brain, so there's about 100 billion of them, they make connections to other nerve cells. Those connections are like a cell reaching an arm out onto the cell next door and sticking onto it to talk to it. Those structures are stabilised by making the membranes stiff, and you stiffen membranes by inserting cholesterol molecules into them. So people were concerned when statins came along, if we're stopping the body or reducing the capacity of the body to make its own cholesterol, will we affect the integrity of membranes in cells where that really matters, like nerve cells? Could this contribute to long-term cognitive changes? This has since, in the 30 plus years that we've been using statins, been subject to very rigorous scrutiny. And at the moment, there is no evidence that the statins in and of themselves are linked to dementia. You're much more likely to suffer from damage to your nervous system because of vascular disease than because of a chemical effect of the statin. What do I mean by that? Well, because your brain is so metabolically active and it uses about 20% of your blood flow, that's right, a tiny structure that is about 2% of your body mass is using 20% of your blood flow. Because the brain is so dependent on a healthy blood system, the brain absolutely relies on healthy blood vessels. If you have furred up arteries and furred up blood vessels, you're much more likely to damage your brain than any effect the statin is going to unleash on your brain. So as far as we know at the moment, there is no evidence that statins are linked to cognitive problems.
It is our regular and very popular appointment with the Naked Scientist. Dr. Chris Smith is a consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. Our Naked Scientist, and you can put your question to Dr. Smith via WhatsApp on 072-567-1567. You can also call anytime on 021-446-0567. How do I get my brain to remember all the information that I'm studying? Do you have some story hacks for me, being the genius that you are?
The answer is repetition. If you think about what does a sportsman or sportswoman do to become good at their sport, they practice. What does a memory person do to remember lots of things? They practice. How does a musician learn a piece of music? Well, they don't just hear it once unless they're a prodigy. Most people have to practice. And the brain responds really well to repetition. So rehearsing things, mental rehearsal, thinking about things, and thinking about them again and again helps to lay them down. Talk to yourself. I often say to the students I teach that one way to really consolidate information is to teach it to somebody else. Now, you might not have a person who's conveniently there to listen to you all the time, but you can teach yourself. So give yourself a mini lecture. Learn a subject and then speak it out loud to yourself. Hear yourself reproducing it. And if you can't make it make sense as it's coming out of your mouth, you haven't understood it yet. And once you can actually tell it like a story, a bit like I'm telling this like a story, you'll find that you've consolidated that information in a way that is much more memorable than just trying to reel off lists of facts. Also, various tricks. There are things like sometimes you can use mnemonics, so you can remember a catchy phrase in your head that enables you to think of the sequence of things that should be there. Medical school is full of all kinds of naughty and smutty ones, which we can't repeat on the radio, but they're very memorable. So find tricks like that work for you. Sometimes it's phrases, common phrases that you can think, well, the thing I'm trying to remember sounds like this or rhymes with this. I often use that as a trick, and it helps me to remember these things. And sometimes there's just brute force memory. You just have to rehearse something and learn it and drill it into yourself until you can absolutely recall it, and then it won't go away.
Terry wants to know, Terry says, I'm going grey. How do I stop, arrest, or reverse the process?
Oh, shave it all off. That's a simple way, isn't it? The other way is there's stuff called hair dye, or you do the sensible thing called Just let nature take its course. All these people who are trying to defy the aging process, I watch them on television and you just think they end up looking so weird. It's obvious. It's like Joan Rivers on steroids, isn't it? It's just kind of like, and even she acknowledged that she'd gone too far towards the end. I mean, I love Joan Rivers. She was so funny, absolutely brilliant comedian. But even she acknowledged she'd gone too far. Stop trying to defy the aging process. Embrace the fact that with a little bit of older wrinkliness, greyness, comes wisdom. And people respect that. And they think, yes, he must be wise. Look at Clarence. I mean, he looks wise, doesn't he?
Such an actor. Dr. Smith, how do vultures find their prey? Smell or sight?
Vultures are birds. Birds have amazing visual systems and they can see things that we could never even dream of being able to see. They've got incredible acuity of vision. So, number one, from a great distance, they can spot all the hallmarks of lunch. So they use vision. And then as they get closer in, they can have a closer look and then things like smell and other signals kick in to tell them whether or not that is worth dining on.
How is it possible that the naked scientist does not believe in God when he discusses the miracles that are us? From Miranda.
Well, I'm a believer in empirical research and evidence. And I don't think that there's any evidence that God doesn't exist, and I don't have a problem with religion at all. I think that actually religion and science are completely compatible. They're just two totally different subjects, and you shouldn't try and conflate or explain one by the other. There's an old saying, isn't there, don't put God to the test. They're two totally different things. And in fact, one of the forefathers, ancestors of cosmology, the whole idea that the universe was born in a big bang, he was actually a Belgian priest, Lemaitre. And he was very comfortable with the idea of a big bang because he said, well, there's a moment of creation. So in some respects, religion and science do overlap and that they are not incompatible with each other. But it really comes down to personal choice and what you choose to believe in. And if you're somebody who believes in evidence and being able to explain things, then miracles are, by definition, inexplicable. They're things that shouldn't happen and do. So therefore, are they just coincidences or is there something special going on? Well, we need to be able to explain them. If something happens, it must happen according to the laws of physics that govern the universe. And therefore, we should be able to explain it.
Is an MRI or CAT scan dangerous for a toddler, short or long term? That one from Anne.
Hello, Anne. Well, MRIs and CAT scans are actually two different things. An MRI is a magnetic resonance imaging scan, and this is where a person is put into a very powerful magnetic field. So powerful, in fact, that if you had a dog lead and you put it near the scanner, it would form a rigid rod, a bit like a steel pole. And because of the intense magnetic field, they work by making all the water molecules in your body, the hydrogen in the water molecules in your body, line up along the magnetic field, and then you pulse them with a radio frequency, which makes some of them jump off kilter temporarily, and then as they flick back in line with the magnetic field, they release another signal that the scanner can see, and that's how it builds up a three-dimensional picture of the inside of you. This, as far as we know, is completely harmless. And it gives incredibly high resolution, very detailed images. The downside of it is you have to go into a very claustrophobic tube, stay incredibly still for as long as it takes the radiographer to acquire the scan images. And depending upon what they're looking at and how easy it is to image, can take more or less time. And it's claustrophobic, it can be hot, and it's very noisy. The best analogy I can give, having done this for research and other things, is it's a bit like someone putting you inside an oil drum and then hammering on the outside while you're in there for about half an hour. So it's not pleasant, but the scan results are amazing and it's not harmful. A CAT scan, computer-aided tomography, is a three-dimensional scan of the inside of the body built up using X-rays. Now, the benefit of a CAT scan is it's very quick. It's not claustrophobic because you just slide through something that looks a bit like a giant donut with you going through the middle of it. So you get the images in seconds to minutes. And for that reason, it's much less unattractive and unappealing and is easier for especially little kids. And you therefore don't have to stay as still for as long. The downside of a CAT scan is because it's based on X-rays, these are ionizing rays, and the dose that you get of ionizing radiation from a CAT scan is quite significant. You would have to live for about 4.5 years out in the environment to get as much radiation from the environment as you get in a matter of seconds in a CAT scan. So done once or twice to look for important things that might change your life diagnostically. Very, very useful, very low cost, very convenient. Done too much and you might increase your risk of damage done by ionizing radiation, and that can include damage to your DNA, which could lead to a cancer risk. So we don't do these things lightly, and we don't do them too often because we're increasing the risk of side effects if we do.
Is the naked scientist worried that AI will replace him?
Not really, because at the moment my experience of AI is a bit patchy. In some respects, there is some amazing things it can do. It's very good at pattern recognition. It can spot various things that we might overlook. It can guide you towards things, but it can't think originally. AI is just trained on the product of human endeavour and human information. All it can do is regurgitate to you stuff that we've already discovered. It can show you where the gaps are. It can tell us where to look in terms of research and that kind of thing. But it can't compete with a human creatively. And you can spot that it's not as good as us. It's very, very flawed at the moment. But there's certainly some amazing things that you can do with this computer software. And the time is coming when it will, unfortunately, replace an enormous amount of human endeavour and human labour. There are lots of jobs that are going to become significantly under threat because of this, because a computer program is much cheaper to run than a person. But I don't think in the near term that things like my medical job are under significant threat because of, I think, if I ask, could I replace myself tomorrow with a computer program? Some aspects of what I do, yes, I absolutely could, but that would free me up to do more of the things that I don't have enough time to do as well as I could do them if I had more time. So I don't think my medical job's at the moment under threat. Do I think my broadcasting sort of job and role is under threat? No, I don't, because I think part of it is the uniqueness that you bring to a program. Why do we have presenters on the radio? We have them because they bring something unique and different to their program, their style, and they build a relationship with an audience. And a person, when I'm listening to the radio, I'm listening to that person presenting that program. And if it was not a real person, if it was just a computer program, would I have the same relationship with them as a listener? I'm not sure I would. And I think for that reason, there's something about the authenticity of a human person, a human voice, and that contact that I think gives something at the moment special and additional to a piece of media, whether that's a radio program, a telly program, or a podcast.
And you can sue a person.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you should be very careful about what you listen to in the media because, of course, nothing is ever fault-free and you might be misled. We try our very best to make sure you never are. But, yeah, that's true. You can sue a person. You can sue a computer program. If you write a piece of medical software and it causes problems, then you can end up at the end of a lawsuit. And if you write an accountancy package and it makes you underpay your taxes and then the tax office comes after you, you also have recourse to the people who write the software. So you can sue the manufacturer of a computer program, but you end up being misled in the first place with either. So swings and roundabouts, really.
We can squeeze in Patsy's question. Does Dr. Chris Smith have an easy explanation for his diastolic blood pressure?
I'm not really clear what is being asked here, but the systolic blood pressure is when your heart beats, and the diastolic blood pressure is what we record when your heart relaxes. So when you feel your pulse in your arteries, in your arm, for instance, or in your neck, and you feel the thump as the pulse of blood comes through, the pressure goes up when the blood comes through the artery. That's the systolic pressure, the higher number your doctor or nurse gives you. And when the heart is relaxing between beats, the pressure falls because there's no blood being pushed out of the heart at that moment in time. So the arteries begin to elastically contract back around the blood. That's the diastolic pressure, and that's the lower of the two numbers.